Hello, willkommen zurück. In today's video I wanted to highlight, well, not really a game, it's more of a visual novel. It's called Ukraine War Stories. It's made by a Ukrainian development team, and it's basically visual novels of certain areas during the Ukraine conflict from the viewpoint of civilians. I think projects like this are very important to realize how horrible it actually is to be in these regions in modern warfare times. Yeah, let's have a look. This is obviously a little different piece than my usual stuff. There will be a lot to read. I will try to read some of this, obviously, as this is storytelling. Oh, hold on. There was no sound in the menu, so it was hard to adjust this properly. Yeah, I'm gonna read most of it. I don't know how far I'm gonna go into this episode. Obviously, I want to leave something for yourself to discover. We're gonna start with Hostomel. So, yeah, the story of Oleksiy. It was barely past 17:00, but it was getting dark already. Spring was on its way in, but we were still getting early sunset and cold nights. Another quiet evening in the house that was entirely too big for just me and my Lilia. Ever since our daughter had settled in Kiev, no surprises there, Hostomel was always too small for her. Still, she kept in touch with us. In fact, that evening I was just trying to figure out a present from her, a smartphone. Well, I wasn't trying anymore. I delegated the task to the neighbor's girl, Milenia Mirzoyan. Milenia is a bright girl, top of her class at the medical university in Kiev. Much younger than my own daughter, Katya. Barely in her 20s, quick-witted and full of life. Unlike me, a tired old man. I've been an aviation engineer for 40 years before retiring, and yet these modern gadgets are beyond anything I've worked with. Now, my wife Lilia, she's the savvy one. But that evening, she was preoccupied. Oleksiy, she said in a worried voice. Oleksiy, have you heard what Putin is saying? He recognized those republics in Donbass. She clutched at her chest. Oh God, the Russians are going to invade. I looked over to see her watching a Russian broadcast on YouTube. I could only roll my eyes. For the last few weeks, what Putin was saying was everyone's favorite gossip. That a big war was coming. That the Russians were finally going to invade in full force. That's why Milenia left Kiev a day ago and came to join her parents in Hostomel. Many people fled the capital in the last few days. It was as if everybody expected Kiev to be bombed off the face of the earth. Lily, please. Nothing's gonna happen, I said. When I caught Milenia's glance, she was afraid too. Mr. Borisov, they've got so many troops on our borders. They wouldn't keep them there if they were just bluffing. That's exactly how bluff works, child, I chuckled. We have nothing to fear because... And there we got a multiple choice, which actually raises the moods of the right... Yeah, okay, let's just... The right time for the attack has passed. Putin will try to annex Donbass at most. If Putin invades, the UN will eat him alive. He doesn't have nearly enough forces. Well, I'm trying to not see this from my perspective, but from the perspective of Oleksiy. And I guess at this time, I guess he would have said something like Putin will try to annex Donbass at most. He's keeping forces on our border to keep our lines stretched thin, so that he can easily take Donbass and freeze the war for another 8 years. I tried to give the girls a reassuring smile. In retrospect, I may have looked a little smug. You know, at least I took first aid courses and stocked us up on some gauze. That'll be useful, right, darling? She looked at Milenia, who replied with enthusiastic nodding. You could have done something useful as well, instead of buying more model planes. I just chuckled. I could tell she was worried. She didn't mean it one bit. Look, if you're so worried, I'll go get the car fueled up. Say, on Thursday? We weren't using our car much, expect to buy groceries, so the near empty tank didn't seem like an issue. With my bum leg, I barely left home anyway, and Lilia worked as a teacher. Her students were all on distance learning. Then we'll go have a vacation in the Carpathians. A week, no, 2 weeks. Until this whole deal resolves itself, and you'll see that I was right. Stocking up on fuel is a good idea, Melania chimed in. My dad is stocking up as well, before the prices rise even more. I nodded. I didn't believe war was coming, and if I did, could I do anything to prevent it? But there was something I could do. Help everyone stay calm. And we raised the mood of Melania and Lilia. There was a deafening noise outside, wresting me from sleep instantly. At first I didn't believe my own ears. I thought I hadn't woken up at all, and this was all nightmare. But then I heard the noise again. Explosions. We had the first day of the war. Oh god, Lyosha. They are bombing the airfield. Look, those helicopters are shooting rockets. I looked around and saw my wife. She was already running towards the window. Did she hear it first? She was always the quicker thinker between us two. After a night of sleep, stepping on my bum leg felt even worse than usual. I limped towards Lily and looked into the window. I didn't have the eyesight to make out the details, but I saw a helicopter swarming over the hospital airfield, launching bright flares all around them. Not rockets, flares. They do it so our soldiers don't shoot them down. They are fixing to deploy the airborne troops. Lily covered her mouth with her hands and looked at me. I don't think I ever seen her so confused and scared. Pack our things. We might have to leave the town. As my wife ran around the house packing up everything of any value, I was trying to process what was happening. The war had begun. I had seen it with my own eyes, but I still couldn't comprehend it. I was so convinced that the Russians would never act upon their threats. What a fool I've been. There was gunfire coming from the airfield. It snapped me back to reality. I had to do something. When I went to check up on Lily, I saw her hands were shaking. I had to calm her down, or at least make sure that she didn't forget to pack anything important. On the other hand, I never got around to refueling our car and only had enough petrol to drive to the nearest fueling station. So we have the decision to make. Either we help Lily pack up, we ask our neighbors for gasoline, or we are comforting Lily. And that's a good question. Medicine is important. I mean, that's a really hard decision. All of these three things are important. Keeping the spirit up during these situations is really important, as you must not lose hope. Which might be the hardest part as a human being if everything around you is falling apart as you know it. I think I'm actually gonna do the humane stuff and comfort Lily. With a sigh, I gave Lily a hug. She quietly said, "Lyosha, I'm scared." She very rarely admitted such things. It reminded me how confident I was just a few days ago that the Russians weren't going to invade. What a fool I was. What's going to happen now? I hugged her closer and tried to come up with something reassuring. Surprisingly, I didn't sound unsure. I don't know, honey, but I doubt the Russians will succeed. Our army spent the last 8 years learning to fight. So we hold the Russians off. As long as we don't panic, we will be alright. I don't know how long we just stood there, but in that time, the gunfire had died down. Lily withdrew and quietly wiped tears from her eyes. She seemed almost calmed down. I go put up a kettle. Since those Russians woke us up, let's have some morning tea. I think I had a box of chocolate somewhere. We had a splendid tea party, all things considered. Too splendid, really. It convinced us that life went on, and there was no cause for worrying. Things were still normal enough. I will never forgive myself for believing that, and not getting Lilia out of hospital on that day. The neighbors. Alexei, what will we do? Lilia complained, sniffling away the last of her tears. Did you hear it? Did you hear how loud it was? How terrible. I nodded and hugged Lilia closer. I sure heard it. Around 3 a.m. when we were sleeping in the basement, a shell hit our house. I don't know what it was, but it shook the whole place. I was crawling around looking for my cane, wondering if we should stay put or run. While Lilia was covering her ears and screaming, then we were sure the walls were tumbling down on us. She started crying. This would all be over soon, I hope. But at that time, all I could do was hold her close. The very next morning, when the fighting had quieted down, I heard a knock on our basement door. Our neighbors came to visit us, the whole Mirzoyan family. Milenia and her parents. Alexei, Lilia, David, the father of the family, walked up to me and firmly shook my hand. How are you two doing? Are you alright? We saw your house getting hit. Thank the Almighty you weren't there. No kidding, I sighed. We have to leave, David. This is getting too dangerous. David's wife, Olha, chimed in. We can't leave, Alexei Fedorovich. We've spoken with the Tutorial Defense Office. They said it's too dangerous. There's already talk about Russians shooting at cars. I wanted to curse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sure, the war had been going for 8 years now, but it was in Donbass, on the edge of the country. Now the Russians were taking their planes and tanks and bombs all the way up to Kiev. I shook my head. Tell me, did they take the Antonov airport? If they did, the road to Kiev would be wide open. We'd be seeing thousands, if not tens of thousands of men and vehicles rolling out in the next few days. No, my friend, they didn't. It's quite a story, really, David said, and motioned for his wife and daughter to carry on without him. They brought us some supplies and took them downstairs. David meanwhile told me the news. They had yet to make it to the TV, but the gossip had already spread around the town. The Russians took the Antonov airport, but it's all shelled to bits, unusable. They won't be landing anything there, or using any of our planes. I gasped and David cut himself off. He didn't need it to continue. Mirya, too. Is it gone? I've worked for the Antonov Design Bureau for 40 years. Aviation was my life, still is. However, little of that is left in me. And nothing the Antonov Bureau ever made came even close to Antonov 225 Mirya, the biggest cargo plane ever designed. A marvel of engineering. Soviet, Ukrainian, it didn't matter. Mirya was a treasure. I thought it was terrible waste that it was barely flown in our 3 decades of independence. But that day, I learned a truly terrible waste. Mirya was that gigantic airplane at Hostomel Airport that sadly was destroyed during the invasion of the Russian forces. From pictures of it, I remember that like most of the actual fuselage was destroyed. The cockpit seemed kinda intact. But the wings were damaged, the heck was damaged, like, yeah, the ailerons, fuselage, everything was pretty much fucked up, so, yeah, really a loss, really a loss. It was a marvel of engineering. That thing could carry, like, insane amounts of cargo, compared to every other plane out there. Pretty much 3 times, like, the second largest, I think, something like that. I'm not exactly sure about the numbers, maybe I'm exaggerating, but let's continue on. I felt a sting in my chest and clutched at it. David quickly rushed to support me. He helped me sit down on the ground. I couldn't talk at first, so he continued. What a rotten world, huh? I told my girl to wait out the war in Hostomel if it came. And now the war has come here. He reached into his jacket's inner pocket, and before I knew it, there was a bottle in his hand. I was appalled at first, drinking at a time like this, but David kept talking. Nothing is sacred to those Russians. Destroying Mirya is bad enough. But you know what they do to women? If the Russians get here, if they do, I can't calm my girls down, and I can't protect them either. I don't even have a gun. He reached to uncork the bottle, drawing my attention to it. It was the finest Armenian cognac money could buy. Fine, let's go to your place though. Save the bottle for a better time. Maybe let's gather everyone for a drink. I think everyone could use a drink, actually. Reluctantly, David agreed. It was a magnificent cognac, and Lilia found us some treats to go with it. They were usually reserved for tea time, but this time everybody drank. Even Milenia, who, by her own admission, never even tried beer before. For the rest of the evening, the atmosphere had warmed up. David shared some news about the war generally going our way, and I tried telling jokes. It was a moment of normalcy in these crazy times we all found ourselves in. And finally, the girls lightened up a little. The same couldn't be said about me and David. We put on a show for the women, but we couldn't voice our worries even to each other. The peace of mind for Olha, Lilia, and Milenia was a great reward to strive for, but it left us completely wiped. We left the women to chat amongst themselves and stepped back outside. The day drew to a close, and me and David were padding ways just before the curfew. Shots were already ringing out somewhere far. The night, like the one before, it was going to get loud. Suddenly we hear the sounds of approaching vehicles. What do you know? Our armed forces have finally arrived, David asked, and looked onto the road. Then his face dropped. As the armored vehicles rode down the road, we could see the bright red Zs painted on them. It's been a week since the war had begun. Just a week, an entire week. Time seemed to have slowed down, and every new day that came seemed longer than the last. Deep inside, my fear was growing. Fear for myself, my family, my home, my country. Fear for the future. We heard bombs exploding outside and wondered if the next one would hit us, and if we'd survive it. This constant wait for death left us with neither energy nor willingness to do anything. All we did was keep checking the news. I don't know what we wanted to see there, as good news were in short supply, but any new information served to distract us from the horrors around us. That's what we were doing, sitting in our basement, when my phone rang. Me and Lily flinched from the sound. The happy melody our daughter picked for the ringtone sounded terrible out of place. Sacrilegious, even. It was David, our neighbor. Alexei, hide your phone. The Ruskies are going around town, taking them away. He hung up, and I quickly hid the phone under the floorboards. David's timing was impeccable. Upstairs in our house, we heard a loud crash and heavy footsteps. The Russians broke into our home. We turned off the lights, leaving me and Lily in total darkness, and listened. Lyosha, what do we do? Lily whispered. I heard a growing panic in her voice. In the dark, I found her hand and squeezed it. Let's be quiet. Maybe they'll leave us alone. We weren't so lucky. In a few moments, someone knocked on the basement door. It was a heavy sound. They must have been knocking with a rifle's butt. Open up, quick, or we are breaking the door. I didn't want to let the Russians in, but I didn't want to antagonize armed men either. We had to turn on the lights and open the door. 3 such soldiers descended into the basement. They were armed and looked ready to use their weapons at the drop of a hat. Lily backed away from them, and so did I. Using a wall for support, one of the soldiers noticed my limb. What's wrong with your leg, old man? He must have thought it was a combat wound. Hurts to step on it, an old injury. Spent half my life with a cane. He nodded and looked around our basement. We were searching the houses, looking for Nazis and saboteurs. Do you know any Nazis in the cities? Give them a false lead, play dumb, tell them they are being lied to. Well, giving them a false lead might also come back to haunt us. Playing dumb might be the smartest move here. The problem is, if I telling them they are lied to, I mean, these guys are pretty much, you know, when they come in like this asking for Nazis, they pretty much believe what they are looking into, so I think the smartest move would actually be to play dumb. I tried to make up something, hope they'd simply leave us alone. So we don't talk to our neighbors much, we wouldn't know of any Nazis. As I spoke, I felt my hands start to shake. I was too old for such stress. Then I thought about the Russians' reaction if they noticed it and thought I was lying. This only made the matters worse. My vision got dark, but suddenly Lily came to the rescue. What are you doing? Can't you see he's worried out of his mind? My husband is a hero of socialist labor. His father reached Berlin in 1945, and you are asking him about Nazis? The soldier looked at me, then at Lilia. Then he spit on the floor and commanded the rest to leave. I slid to the floor down to the basement wall. There was a ringing in my ears, and the room was spinning out of control. Deafened by my own heartbeat, I could barely hear Lily when she said, "Here, drink this. It should help." A few sips of cold water did bring me back to life. When my vision cleared up, I looked at Lily with gratitude. "Thank you, darling. What would I do without you?" Lily didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She just smiled and squeezed my palm. I thought once again how lucky I was to have such a wife. Under fire. There was still fighting, but only on the outskirts. Lily had never gotten used to it, but I did. "There's still fighting," was something I kept telling myself as I saw Russians rummage through the houses on our streets. A unit of Chechens, Kadirovites, as they are called, even dropped by our wreck of a house. There wasn't much to steal, but they stole it anyway. Me and Lily had enough sense not to argue, and so they just took what they wanted and left. The Mirzojans turned hadn't come yet, but they knew they wouldn't be so lucky. That's why I couldn't refuse David when he asked that his daughter stay with us a few days. Me and Lilia, we are just a tired old couple. With my leg, I wasn't much of a threat. The Russians were done with us. Thank you so much, Alexei. Those people are monsters. David shared as Lily helped Milena make her way into our basement. Have you heard the word around town? Of course I had. The Russians took whatever they wanted. They ate anything that could be eaten, drank anything that could be drank, and took anything they could resell back home. I wasn't born yesterday. I expected as much. It was war, and I could accept it. But what they did to women, I refuse to accept. Are you sure you don't want to join us with Olha? We'll make room, I offered. He shook his head. No, Fedorovich. You just keep Milena hidden for a few days, okay? Me and Olha, we'll manage somehow. We keep real quiet. He put his fingers to his lips and smiled. I smiled back at him as we walked out onto the street. I waved him goodbye. There was a pop, like a firecracker going off in the distance. David fell to the ground. He screamed. What I did next, I could never be proud of. I threw myself toward the basement entrance and slammed the door shut. Downstairs, Lily yelped at the loud bang. My chest began to hurt. I clutched it with one hand. A second distant pop. The screaming stopped. I think I waited for hours. Milena was downstairs, covering her mouth, looking in mute horror, looking with David's eyes. I think I waited for hours. When I finally peeked through the door, slow and careful, making no sound, there was David all right, and the two Russians, one standing over David and another rifling through his pockets. And what did you do that for? The one standing asked. He sounded calm, bored even. He was a Nazi, can't you tell? I know them when I see them. The other shrugged in the dark. He was not being serious. I could hear him grin. They laughed, then they both lit themselves a cigarette. I closed the basement door and kept it closed through the night. Milena cried for hours. Lily held her hand and did her best not to cry. But in the morning, she too joined in when she heard all us wailing outside. In the morning, there was fighting on the outskirts again, but closer to us. Sometimes bullets whizzed through the air right above our fence. When I opened the door to the basement, Olha crawled towards us on all fours. But something had to be done about David. I mean, the only decent thing to do would be trying to get him and bury him as a friend of the family. So even if it's risky, we need to do that. Keeping your decency, your humanity in times like this might be the most important, I guess. Not like becoming the beast you are trying to fight. I could not leave my friend like this, so I got a shovel and crawled towards David. As I dug a grave for him, I had to stop at least 24 times. The air would get too hot, the shots too loud, and the ground would shake so hard it knocked us all off our feet. In the end, it was barely a grave. David's broad Armenian shoulders barely fit in it. It seemed like the earth itself refused to believe he was dead. But it had to suffice. And while it was little relief for the girls, we did David good. The dogs weren't going to get him. Yeah, and actually, I mean, I kind of getting depressed here myself as reading through this. So you see, this is like very intense stuff. If you think about like from your own perspective, this is like human experiences. Obviously, there is some kind of variancy to it. I'm not I'm not exactly sure how much these game mechanics play a role in the storytelling, like the mood and stuff like that. So yeah, the game is for free on Steam. I highly recommend, if you're interested in the topic, download it, play it, if you can call it playing. This is not really a game, it's more like an informative piece in my opinion, and it's very important to spread it. Yeah. I was about to say I hope you enjoy it, but I don't think this is like the right thing to say, so maybe leave a comment, like, even subscribe if you haven't yet. This is not my typical content, but it was important for me to like put this out there. Thank you very much for coming by. Hope you guys have a great week, a great day, stay healthy, and See you soon.